She walked away from one of the most recognizable names in rock history and told her father she didn't want his help. The daughter of Kiss legend Gene Simmons, Sophie Tweed-Simmons, grew up with cameras in her face from the age of 13, and by the time the show ended, most people assumed she would trade on the family name to launch herself. What happened instead is a story about what it actually takes to build something real when everyone is watching and waiting for you to fail. The pilot episode of Gene Simmons' Family Jewels was about throwing a surprise birthday party for Sophie. She was 13 years old. She hadn't asked to be on television. She hadn't auditioned for anything. One day the cameras weren't there, and the next day they were, and they stayed for 7 seasons, until she was 20 years old. The show ran on A&E from 2006 to 2012, and within 2 seasons it had become the second highest rated series on the network, trailing only Dog the Bounty Hunter. The Simmons family was good television. Gene was loud and theatrical. Shannon Tweed was measured and sharp. Nick and Sophie were the kids who somehow managed to seem normal despite being raised inside one of the strangest households in American entertainment. Sophie was the one viewers seemed most drawn to. The dynamic between her and Shannon, 2 women navigating a world shaped almost entirely by Gene's outsized personality, gave the show its emotional core in a way the producers hadn't entirely planned. Audience response to that relationship eventually led to a short-lived spin-off in 2014 called Shannon and Sophie, featuring just the 2 of them. It lasted 1 season, but while the cameras rolled, Sophie was already thinking about what came next. And what came next had nothing to do with what anyone expected. And that's when the decision was made, the one nobody around her saw coming. The year the show ended, 2012, Sophie Simmons walked into an X Factor audition in San Francisco with strict instructions for her parents. Don't interfere, don't speak to the judges, don't do anything to help. Gene reportedly wanted to assist. She told him no. The point wasn't to get through, it was to prove she could stand in a room and be evaluated without his name doing the work. She auditioned with Adele's version of To Make You Feel My Love. 3 of the 4 judges passed her through. L.A. Reid was the holdout, saying he didn't get chill bumps. She made it to boot camp and was eliminated there. That experience confirmed something she had already suspected. She later described deliberately avoiding the music and modeling industries for years because she didn't want the comparisons to her parents following her everywhere. The logic was direct. If she entered the industry through a door Gene Simmons had opened, nobody would ever know whether she could have opened one herself. She enrolled at Pitzer College in Claremont, California. Her major wasn't music or performance. It was computer science and religious studies. She played volleyball for the Pomona Pitzer Sajans. For a stretch of years, she was, as she later put it, trying to be a normal person, a thing that had been largely impossible while the cameras were rolling. Most people who know this story stop here, but the real story starts right now. Before the music career accelerated, before the modeling work, before any of the creative output that would define her adult life, there was Sophie's place. In January 2012, the same year the show ended, 19-year-old Sophie Simmons lent her name to a new child advocacy center in Surrey, British Columbia. She worked with Mayor Diane Watts and the Royal Canadian Mounted Police to bring it into existence. The center's purpose was specific and serious: to provide a single, child-friendly location where physically and sexually abused children could give their accounts to police, medical professionals, and counselors without being moved from building to building and asked to repeat traumatic information multiple times. Sophie explained her involvement this way. When she was in high school, she had traveled internationally through a community service program and worked in orphanages in other countries. She saw children in those orphanages who were there because of abuse. When she came home, she assumed that abuse at that scale was a problem that existed elsewhere, until she learned it was happening everywhere, including in the communities she'd grown up in. It just wasn't visible to people who weren't looking for it. By 2021, the center had grown from serving 81 children in its first year to over 230 children annually, and had expanded its age range upward to include youth up to 15 years old. Federal funding of over $5 million was secured across a 4-year period beginning in 2016. The facility is still operating. She never talked about this publicly as part of building a brand. She just did it at 19. Here's what the comments kept asking, and here's the answer they never got. Until now. Most people who followed Sophie Simmons after Family Jewels ended thought of her as a solo artist, someone releasing independent singles and building a modest following. That picture is accurate but incomplete. The more significant career she was building happened almost entirely out of public view. Starting in 2018, Sophie shifted her focus towards songwriting for other artists. The credits accumulated quietly. She co-wrote with Alan Walker, the Norwegian DJ whose track Faded had reached audiences in the hundreds of millions. She co-wrote Mine with Felix Cartal, a track that won a Soken Award. She co-wrote Hold Me Close with Sam Felt and Ella Henderson. Then came 2024. That year, Sophie co-wrote 8 songs on German pop star Lena's album Loyal to Myself, including the album's focus single, Good Again. Around the same time, she wrote Bubblegum for New Jeans, the South Korean group whose release moved over 1 million copies in its first week and topped the Hanteo charts. More recently, she co-wrote 2 songs on Freya Sky's Stardust EP, an EP that hit #1 on the Billboard vinyl chart in the United States, and simultaneously went #1 in the United Kingdom, with the lead single Silent Treatment reaching #8 on the US Pop Airplay chart. She is Juno-nominated. She is working with artists across 3 continents, and most of the people who watched her grow up on A&E have no idea. In 2020, when the nepotism question came up in an interview, she put it plainly: if family connections really worked the way people assumed, she would already be signed to a major label and a publisher. She wasn't. She was building it herself. And if you think that was surprising, stay with me, because this next part is why the whole story matters. In February 2023, Sophie Simmons married James Henderson in the backyard of her mother Shannon's Malibu home. About 50 people attended the ceremony. Henderson works in film, and the two had met in 2014 when Sophie walked into a coffee shop where he was working and, by her account, was smitten by the hot waiter. She gave him her number. They went on a date that same day and had been together ever since. The proposal came in July 2022 during a family trip to Switzerland. Gene Simmons, on hearing the news, reportedly told Page Six he didn't feel ready for his youngest child to get married. He attended the wedding anyway. Sophie walked down the aisle in a blush Le Havre dress. A judge performed the ceremony, a choice she explained was practical. Both families held different religious backgrounds, and rather than navigate that, they opted for something that belonged to neither. The reception was held the following evening at Delilah in West Hollywood, with a 1920s speakeasy theme and roughly 250 guests. Sophie and her brother Nick had performed jazz at that venue before the wedding. She chose it partly because of that. In August 2025, she joined Gene Simmons on stage with the band Chevy Metal to perform Rock and Roll All Night, a moment that confirmed what her career had demonstrated throughout. She could step back into that world on her own terms, when she chose, and step back out of it the same way. At this point in the story, most people walked away. What she did instead is the part nobody talks about. Sophie Simmons is 33 years old. She is a working songwriter with credits on songs that have collectively reached tens of millions of listeners across Europe, North America, and South Korea. She is a Juno-nominated writer with more releases confirmed for late 2026 and a major 2027 already in motion, according to her professional biography. She runs no public persona in the traditional influencer sense. Her Instagram has over 300,000 followers and currently shows 12 posts. She describes herself in her professional bio as being bad at this, better at songwriting. That line is doing more work than it looks like it's doing. Sophie's Place, the child advocacy center she helped establish at 19, is still active and has grown every year since it opened. That center has now served thousands of children. She built a career without a major label. She built a charity before she had a career. She got married in a backyard with 50 people and held the party at a venue she had personal memories of. None of it was designed to be watched. The story of Sophie Simmons after Family Jewels ended isn't a comeback story or a reinvention story. It's the story of someone who looked at a massive platform she'd been handed as a child, decided she didn't want to stand on it, and built her own floor underneath, one that turned out to be considerably more solid. Her catalog is expanding. Her professional biography points toward 2026 and 2027 as significant years for new releases and collaborations. Whatever comes next, she spent the last decade building the kind of credibility that doesn't depend on whose daughter she is. Do you think Sophie made the right call refusing her father's help and building her music career entirely on her own? Or did she make it harder on herself than it needed to be? Leave your answer below.